Welcome back to Dark Horror Stories. In today's episode, I'm sharing 7 deeply unsettling stories from empty streets, the kind of places that should feel familiar, safe, ordinary. Sidewalks and crosswalks and streetlights and all the things we walk past without a second thought. But the people in these stories found something waiting for them in those quiet stretches of pavement that changed the way they see the world at night. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Let's get into it. Story 1. There's this stretch of road in the town where I grew up, Caldwell, a small place in southern Ohio that nobody has ever heard of unless they've driven through it by accident, and it runs between the old grain elevator on the east end of town and the Methodist church on the west. About 6 blocks, maybe 7. My mother used to walk it every morning before I was born, back when she waitressed the early shift at Dottie's, and she always said the town was prettiest in the dark before sunrise, all those old brick storefronts quiet and still. I grew up hearing that, so I guess it stuck. I was 24 when I moved back after college didn't work out the way I'd planned. My plan was to save money for 6 months, maybe 8, living in my childhood bedroom again and working at my uncle's hardware store until I could figure out what came next. I want to be honest, I hated being back. Not the town exactly, but the way everyone looked at me, like I was a cautionary tale they were glad not to be. My Uncle Gerald paid me under the table and let me close up the shop most nights, which meant I usually left around 9 or 9:30 and walked home alone. My car had been dead since February. I kept meaning to fix the alternator. The route home was those 6 blocks on Meridian Street, then a left on Copley, past the parking lot behind the VFW and up the hill to my parents' house. I did it 40, maybe 50 nights in a row without thinking about it. I knew every crack in the sidewalk, every porch light that stayed on all night, which houses had dogs that barked and which ones had dogs that didn't. The night it happened was in late October. I remember because the hardware store had been selling Halloween decorations all week, and the shelves were almost empty and Gerald was annoyed about his supplier. I remember the air smelled like someone nearby was burning leaves, which is illegal in Caldwell, but people do it anyway, and there was a half-moon sitting low over the church steeple. The streetlights on Meridian have this particular orange color that makes everyone look a little sick. I used to joke with my cousin Delia that it made the whole town look like a photograph taken by someone who didn't know what they were doing. I was maybe 4 blocks into the walk when I noticed the street was just empty. Which, okay, it's a small town at 9:30 on a Wednesday, that's not unusual. But there's empty in the way that feels normal, and then there's empty in a different way. I don't know how to describe the difference exactly. That night it felt like the street had been waiting for me to walk onto it, like it had cleared itself out. I told myself I was tired. I'd been on my feet since noon. There was a man standing at the far end of the block, near the crosswalk by the old Sinclair station that had been closed since before I was born. Just standing there. Not walking, not on his phone. Just standing with his back to me looking at the boarded-up station. I didn't think much of it. People stand on sidewalks, that's a thing people do, but I noticed him, and I kept my eye on him the way you do at night when you're alone. I was wearing my work boots with the hard soles and they were loud on the pavement, and I figured he'd hear me coming and turn around. He didn't turn around. I passed within maybe 12 feet of him, close enough that I could see he was wearing a gray jacket, the quilted kind with a corduroy collar and dark pants. His hair was dark and cut short. He was just standing there staring at the station, and I walked past him and nothing happened. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, and I turned the corner onto Copley. The thing is, I heard footsteps behind me, not immediately. Maybe 20 seconds after I turned the corner, I heard steps on the pavement at the same pace as mine, the same rhythm. I turned around. The street behind me was empty, completely empty. The man wasn't there. Nobody was there. I stood still and the footsteps stopped. I know what that sounds like. I know how it sounds. I stood there on Copley Street for a solid minute telling myself it was an echo, that I'd been hearing my own boots bouncing off the brick walls of the old VFW, that I was overtired and being paranoid. I almost convinced myself. I've almost convinced myself many times since. I started walking again, faster this time. The footsteps came back, same pace, same rhythm, lagging behind me by about 2 seconds. I stopped again and they stopped again. Stopped so precisely that there was no trailing off, no final scuff. They just stopped mid-step, the way a recording would stop if someone cut the tape. I didn't run. I want to say I ran, but I didn't. I walked very fast. My mouth had gone completely dry, and I remember thinking I needed water and also thinking that was an incredibly stupid thing to focus on. The footsteps were still there. I kept looking back and there was nothing behind me. Just the orange lit empty street and parked cars and the VFW with its little flags snapping in the October wind. I was maybe 200 yards from my parents' house when I passed under a dead streetlight, and in the cone of darkness beneath it, I saw a shadow on the ground beside mine, walking with me. The same stride, the same pace. A shadow with no body attached to it, stretching forward from a point about 5 feet to my right where there was nothing, absolutely nothing to cast it. I did run then. I ran the rest of the way home and I didn't look back again. I hit the porch stairs and yanked open the screen door and stood in the kitchen with every light on until my mother came down and asked me what was wrong, and I said nothing. I just scared myself, which she believed because she knew I'd been stressed. The next morning I went to get my work boots from the mudroom. The right boot, the one I'd been striking the pavement harder with all those nights because of the uneven wear on the sole, had 4 parallel scratches along the back heel. Clean, even scratches cut into the rubber like someone had run a sharp edge across it deliberately. 4 of them just above where your heel sits when you walk. I still have the boot. I haven't worn it since. I don't walk home that way anymore. I drive, alternator fixed or not. Story 2. My grandmother on my father's side had this expression she used whenever someone mentioned walking around at night in Sweetwater. She'd say the streets had ears. We all thought it was just an old woman's way of saying be careful, mind your business, don't cause trouble after dark. My father said she'd picked it up from her own mother, who came from somewhere in the hill country of central Texas, and brought a whole collection of phrases that nobody could trace to anything specific. I never took it literally. I want to be clear about that. I was not a superstitious person. My name is, well, it doesn't matter. Most people call me Ren. I was 31 when this happened, working night security at a distribution warehouse on the edge of Sweetwater for a company that moved packaging materials. The job was boring in the particular way that only extremely repetitive, solitary work can be. My shift ran 11 at night to 7 in the morning, and there was a 90-minute window between 2 and 3:30 when nothing needed my attention. No rounds, no check-ins. So I'd take my dinner break and sometimes walk the perimeter road that ran around the warehouse property. The perimeter road connected to a small service street, which connected to a longer commercial strip that was completely dead at that hour. A line of closed businesses, a tire shop, a payday loan place, a Vietnamese restaurant my coworker Bao insisted was excellent but I'd never tried, a used furniture store with a sagging awning. Everything dark, everything locked. I liked it out there. The quiet felt earned, like the day had finally let go. I brought terrible coffee in a thermos and a granola bar that had been in my jacket pocket so long it had taken on the smell of the jacket. My supervisor, a soft-spoken man named Clint Abernethy, had told me on my first week that the surveillance cameras on the east side of the building sometimes picked up coyotes and to not bother noting them in the log. The area had a lot of coyotes, which I'd heard but never seen. I kept meaning to look up what time of year they were most active. I never did. It was a Tuesday in March, cold enough that my breath made small clouds. The pavement on the service street had that wet cement look even though it wasn't raining, just a low fog sitting in the gutters and crawling along the storefronts. I was thinking about something completely unrelated, a disagreement I'd had with my brother Marcus over a family thing, one of those circular arguments that doesn't go anywhere when I noticed the lights, or the lack of them. The streetlight at the far end of the commercial strip, the one near the intersection with Route 11, had gone out. I noticed because I'd used it as my turnaround point every night for 4 months, that pool of yellow light on the asphalt. Without it, the end of the block was just darkness and the fog was thicker there, pressing down low. I turned around a block earlier, nothing dramatic. I just didn't feel like walking into a dark intersection in fog at 2 in the morning. That's not unusual instinct. On my way back, I passed the tire shop and I heard something. A voice, not words exactly. More like the shape of words, the rhythm of speech coming from the narrow alley between the tire shop and the payday loan place. I stopped. I figured it was someone sleeping rough, which happened sometimes in that area. I wasn't going to investigate, that's not my job and I'm not that kind of person, but I stopped and listened for a second because the voice had an odd quality. It was very measured, very even. Then it said my name, just Ren. My name once from the alley. The way my grandmother used to say it, actually, which is why it stopped me so completely. My grandmother had a particular clipped way of pronouncing the vowel that I've never heard from anyone else, and this voice had that exact quality. The exact one. I stood on that sidewalk and my body went completely wrong, not fear like in a movie, but something more physical like being dropped from a height, that lurching stomach feeling. I told myself it was a coincidence. That it was someone in the alley calling out to someone nearby and I'd misheard the word, that it was just a sound that happened to pattern match to my name. The voice said it again, same inflection. Ren. Quiet, patient. I walked faster. I was back on the perimeter road when I heard movement, not behind me exactly, but alongside me on the other side of the chain-link fence that bordered the property. Something moving through the scrub brush at the same pace I was walking. I stopped and it stopped. I started and it started. I couldn't see anything beyond the fence, just the dark and the fog and the shapes of low scrub. I went back inside and finished my shift at the desk with all the external floodlights switched on. The part I keep coming back to is what I found the next morning when I did my 7 a.m. walkthrough. In the alley between the tire shop and the payday loan place, which I checked because I needed to know there was a person in there, there was nobody. Nothing, just wet pavement. But pressed into the soft mud at the alley's entrance there was a single handprint. Palm down, fingers spread, normal enough in size. What was wrong with it was that the fingers were too long in proportion to the palm, and there were 6 of them evenly spaced, where 5 should have been. I didn't photograph it. I've regretted that every day since. I called in sick the next night and the night after that, and then I quit with no notice, which is the only job I've ever just walked away from in my life. Clint Abernethy texted twice to ask if everything was okay. I didn't respond. My grandmother had ears the streets could use. I think about that now. Story 3. I've lived in Chicago my whole life, born at Northwestern Memorial, raised in Logan Square before the neighborhood changed completely, and I've never been afraid of empty streets. That's important for what I'm going to tell you, because I know the first thing people assume is that I panicked over nothing, that any city street at night is going to spook someone if they're alone and it's late. I hear that argument and I want you to understand that it doesn't apply here. My full name is Isabella Fernandez, and the night I'm talking about, I was 28 and working a double shift at the restaurant where I'd been a line cook for 3 years. It was maybe 1:30 in the morning, maybe closer to 2, and I was walking to the Blue Line because my car was in the shop again, and I refused to pay for an Uber at that hour. My roommate Yolanda had texted around midnight asking if I needed a ride, but I'd said no because I didn't want to wake her up. The route was probably 15 minutes on foot through streets I'd walked 100 times. Damon to Milwaukee down to the station. I'd done it in heels, I'd done it in a blizzard, I'd done it hungover. I knew every closed bar and every taqueria and the mural on the corner of Concord that someone had tagged twice, and the city had painted over twice, and the original artist had repainted twice, and it was this whole running argument between the artist and whoever did the tagging. My friend Paco knew the original muralist and said she was furious. I was wearing my kitchen clogs, which I know is a ridiculous thing to wear on the street, but they're comfortable, and I was tired and I'd stopped caring. My apron was still in my backpack because I'd forgotten to leave it at work. I smelled like fryer oil, which is the particular badge of honor and shame of restaurant work. I was thinking about what I was going to eat when I got home, whether there was anything left of the leftover soup Yolanda had made, whether I'd feel too wired to sleep even though I was exhausted. I turned onto Milwaukee and the street was quiet in that deep way you only get on a weeknight past 2, when even the bars have called last round. A few cars parked, most of the businesses dark. The taqueria near the transit station had its neon off, which was unusual. They typically kept the sign on until close, which was 3. I glanced at it without really registering it as strange. There was a woman walking about half a block ahead of me. I noticed her because the sound of her footsteps was different from mine, lighter, quicker. She was wearing a pale coat, not quite white, more like the color of old paper, and she was walking at a steady pace. I wasn't paying close attention to her. I was thinking about the soup. The street was long and straight and I would catch up to her eventually at my pace or not. It didn't matter. Then she stopped. Not at a crosswalk, not to look at her phone. She just stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and stood there. I was maybe 50 feet behind her. I slowed down automatically, the way you do when you're not sure if you want to get closer to someone who's behaving oddly. She didn't move, just stood there facing away from me. The streetlight above her was strong, casting a clear circle around her on the pavement. I crossed to the other side of Milwaukee, which felt rude but also felt necessary. From across the street I could see her more clearly. She was looking up at the building in front of her, a 3-flat with a closed accounting office on the ground floor. She was very still. Not fidgeting, not adjusting her coat, not doing anything a person normally does when they're standing on a sidewalk. I noticed. I couldn't tell you exactly when I noticed because my brain seemed reluctant to process it that her shadow was wrong. The streetlight behind her was casting her shadow forward onto the sidewalk in front of her, but the shadow's head was turned to the side. Her actual head was facing the building, tipped back, looking up. The shadow's head was turned 90 degrees, looking directly across the street. At me. I stopped walking. The shadow's head turned another degree, like it was tracking me. The woman herself didn't move at all. I don't know how long I stood there. 20 seconds maybe less. Then she turned around and looked directly at me, and her face in the streetlight was blank, not blankly expressionless, but literally blank, just skin, smooth skin where the features should have been, as if someone had taken a mold of a face and forgot to add the details. No nose, no eyes, no mouth. Just a pale oval under dark hair, tilted slightly, looking at me. I ran. I'm not ashamed of it. I ran down Milwaukee and through the turnstile at the blue line and onto the platform, and I did not look behind me until I was on the train and the doors had closed. There was nobody unusual on the platform and nobody had followed me in. I got home and I sat in the kitchen until Yolanda's alarm went off at 6 and she came out and found me still sitting there. I told her most of it. She didn't call me a liar, which I appreciated. The part I couldn't explain to her, the part I still can't explain, was my phone. I hadn't taken it out during the walk. I know I hadn't. But when I got home and opened my camera app to check whether I'd somehow accidentally photographed the street, there was a new photo at the top. Timestamped 1:58 a.m. It showed Milwaukee Avenue, shot from the middle of the street looking toward the Blue Line station. My own back was visible in the frame, mid-stride, moving away from the camera. You could see my backpack, the distinctive red patch I'd sewn onto the strap. You could see my kitchen clogs. Someone had taken my phone out of my bag, photographed me from behind, and put it back, while I was walking with it zipped into my backpack. I deleted the photo and then immediately wished I'd kept it. That's the kind of decision you make at 2 in the morning when you haven't slept and you're not thinking clearly. I've made peace with it mostly. Story 4. The neighborhood where my father grew up doesn't exist anymore, technically. They rezoned most of it in the 90s and tore down the row houses and put in condos that were supposed to revitalize the area, but ended up half empty for years. But the street grid is still there. Same intersections, same block patterns, just different buildings on them. My father, whose name is Arthur M. Wangi, still calls the area by its old name and still talks about growing up there like the original place persists underneath everything that replaced it. I went back because of him. He'd been asking me to visit for 2 years, not to the old neighborhood specifically, but to his current apartment 3 miles away, and I kept finding reasons not to, which is its own kind of shameful story I won't get into here. I flew in for a long weekend and spent the first 2 days being a reasonable son, eating his cooking and watching football I didn't care about and listening to him talk about work. His name is Arthur, like I said, and he is a deeply patient person, and I knew I didn't deserve his patience. My own name is David M. Wangi, and I was 29 that year, which is old enough to know better about most things. On the 3rd night, he wanted to walk the old neighborhood after dinner. He does this sometimes, he said, just to see it. I didn't have a good reason to say no. We went out around 8, which in November meant full dark. The condos he'd grown up around the corner from were lit up and occupied now. I'd been wrong about the half-empty thing. That must have been a different block. But the far end of the street, where the rezoning had run out of steam or money, still had a gap. A whole block where 3 row houses had been pulled down and nothing had replaced them. Just a chain-link fence around a gravel lot with a few scraggly trees along the perimeter, and a construction sign that looked like it had been there since the 90s and wasn't going anywhere. My father walked past it without stopping. I was the one who slowed down. There was something in the lot. At first I thought it was a dog. The shape was roughly right, four-legged, low to the ground, moving along the fence line on the far side of the gravel. It was moving strangely though, too slow and too even, like something on a turntable, steady circular movement without the natural variation of an animal walking. I stopped at the fence and watched it. My father turned back when he realized I wasn't beside him. "What?" he said. "Is there a dog in there?" He looked. "I don't see anything." I pointed and he still didn't see it, which confused me because it was visible, not clearly. The lot was dark and the far side was deeper in shadow, but visible enough that I could make out shape and movement. I almost argued with him about it. I told myself he was looking in the wrong direction, or his eyes were worse than mine. I've thought about that choice of rationalization a lot since then. We kept walking. I looked back twice and it was still moving in that circle, slow and steady. We did the whole loop about 40 minutes and came back the same way. The lot was still there. The thing was still in it, still moving, and as we passed I saw it more clearly in the faint overflow light from the condos on the adjacent block. It wasn't a dog. It was too tall, even low to the ground as it was, and it was moving on what seemed like too many limbs, not four, and not six exactly, but something between. Some shifting arrangement of contact points that changed as I watched, like it was reorganizing how it carried itself. Its surface was dark and dull, no shine to it, and when it passed through a slant of light I could see that it had no head in the way that made sense. There was something at the front end, a rounded mass, but it was oriented downward, facing the ground. My father said, "You're staring at that lot again, there's nothing there." I didn't answer him. I walked to the corner and waited for him there. Whatever was in that lot, it was moving in a circle. I understood watching it that it had been doing this for a very long time. Not waiting for us, not reacting to us, just circling. Like it was tracing something, following a path worn invisible into the gravel, around and around in the dark. We got back to my father's apartment and I didn't mention it again. He made tea and we talked about something else, and I sat with my back to the window and drank the tea even though it was too hot. The next morning my flight was early and I took a rideshare to the airport before my father was up. I texted him from the gate. He texted back that he was glad I'd come and that I should come again soon. I said I would. On the walkway from the terminal to my gate I noticed my jacket sleeve, the left one. Along the inner forearm from wrist to elbow there were 3 long stains on the fabric, dark and slightly iridescent, like oil but thicker. I hadn't noticed them the night before. I couldn't account for them. I'd stood at that chain-link fence with both hands in my pockets. I threw the jacket away before I boarded. Story 5. Okay, so this is one I've never told in full, not even to my wife Priya, because I know how the middle part sounds and I didn't want her to think I don't know. I didn't want her looking at me differently. But it's been 6 years and I still have trouble with certain things. Walking alone at night mostly. Walking between streetlights specifically. I sleep with a lamp on in the hallway and Priya thinks it's because of a childhood thing and I've let her believe that. My name is Eric Larson and in 2019 I was living in a mid-sized Minnesota city. I'll just say the metro area, I don't want to be specific. And I was going through a genuinely bad year. My father had died in January, I'd lost my job in March, and I was temping while I figured out what came next. I had a lot of time alone, which I thought was what I needed. It turned out it was. I was not in a good place and I want to be upfront about that because I know it's the first thing people reach for when they hear a story like mine. He was grieving, he was under stress, he imagined it. I was 35 that year. I'd been a systems analyst for 11 years. I am not someone who imagines things. I was in the habit of walking at night because the apartment was small and the nights were long and walking gave me something to do with my body. Mostly I walked a route through the commercial district near my apartment about 2 miles, past the closed coffee shops and the brewery tap room and the bike repair place and the bookstore that stayed open until 11. Good neighborhood, well lit, lots of foot traffic until 10 or so, and then quiet but not eerie quiet. I had a specific bench I liked on the far side of the loop, in a small plaza between a florist and an insurance office. I'd sit there for a few minutes on the way back just to break the walk, look at the sky if it was clear. I'd sit there on the night I'm telling you about. Nothing about that night seemed different at first. The florist had some kind of planter arrangement in the window, forced tulips in a green ceramic pot. The insurance office had their blinds down like always. I was wearing my gray fleece, and I'd had a glass of wine before leaving, and I was thinking about my father. His birthday would have been that week. It was late enough, maybe 11:15, that the street was empty. Not every streetlight was working, which was more noticeable than usual because the night was overcast and there was no ambient light coming through the clouds. I remember noticing that the plaza felt darker than usual, the lights in the surrounding windows fewer. I sat on the bench and just sat for a while, doing nothing. After maybe 5 minutes, I became aware of someone on the sidewalk across the street. A person standing on the opposite side of the block under a working streetlight. I couldn't tell age or gender from that distance. Just a person in a long coat standing very still facing me. That's not threatening in itself. But they were very still, the way that crosses a line into unusual. No shifting of weight, no looking at a phone, no reason to be standing there. Just standing, and I was fairly certain, though, across the whole width of the street, watching me. I did what I'd normally do. I looked at them for a moment, looked away, looked back, tried to send the signal that I'd noticed them without making it confrontational. They didn't move. I got up and started walking home. I took my usual route back through the main commercial block. About halfway down, I glanced back. The street was empty, and then the streetlight to my immediate right flickered out, and the one ahead of me flickered out. And the one behind me, the one I just passed, flickered out, and in the sequence I suddenly understood that something was moving along the line of lights, putting them out one at a time from behind me, and it was moving fast. Not running fast, faster than that. The darkness was reaching toward me in a wave. I ran. I didn't think about it or decide to, I just ran. The lights were going out behind me, and the darkness was keeping pace, and I was sprinting in a way I hadn't since I was a teenager, and my lungs were burning. I cut across the next intersection without looking and ran the last 3 blocks to my apartment building, and threw myself through the door and into the elevator, and stood with my back to the elevator wall, pressing the button for my floor over and over until the doors closed. I looked out my apartment window as soon as I got in. The streetlights were all on. Every one of them, the entire stretch I could see, burning orange and steady like nothing had happened. But there was someone standing in the street below my window, the same long coat, facing up at my building, standing in the light of the street lamp directly in front of my address, and then as I watched, they took one step back, very deliberate, so they were standing in the shadow between 2 lights, just their outline visible, looking up. I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen and waited. When I finally looked out again around 5 in the morning, the street was empty. But on my doormat, which is inside the building at my apartment door on the 6th floor, there was a small piece of paper, folded once. I still don't know how it got there. I've never opened it. It's in a Ziploc bag in the back of my sock drawer. I keep it because getting rid of it feels wrong, like it would be worse not to know where it is. But I've never opened it, and I don't plan to. Priya has never noticed it. That's probably for the best. Story 6. My brother Kenji and I used to have this argument about whether cities are more dangerous at night or small towns. He always said cities because statistics. I always said small towns because when something's wrong in a small town, there's nowhere to go and nobody coming. We never resolved it. That argument feels different to me now. I'm Tommy Chen. I was 22 when this happened, fresh out of community college, living with my parents in a town in rural Oregon that had 1 stoplight and took 40 minutes to reach from the freeway. Main Street was basically the whole town, the hardware store, the post office, the diner, the pharmacy, the bar that doubled as a pool hall. Everybody knew everybody, which was both comforting and claustrophobic. I worked at the diner 5 days a week and had Sundays and Mondays off. The diner was 3 blocks from my parents' house, and I usually walked, rain or shine. Oregon rain, if you've never been there, is a specific thing, not heavy usually but persistent, a fine mist that just exists as an ambient condition of the air. You stop fighting it after a while. You stop carrying an umbrella. It was a Sunday night in February, which in that town meant everybody was home. The bar closed at 10 on Sundays. The pharmacy closed at 6. By 9:30, Main Street might as well have been a stage set. Everything there, everything correct, just entirely empty. I'd been at my friend Sue's house for dinner and I was walking home. That's the whole reason I was out. Sue makes kimchi jjigae that I think about all the time still, rich and funky in the good way, and she'd made a huge pot and I'd eaten too much and I was walking it off. My coat smelled like her kitchen. The mist was doing its thing. The sidewalk was wet and gleaming under the streetlights, and I was not thinking about anything except whether I needed to text my mother that I was on my way, which I should have done but kept forgetting. Main Street was empty in the normal Sunday way. I could see the whole length of it from where I was 3 blocks, and there was nothing unusual. A few parked trucks. The diner's closed sign lit in red. The pharmacy's window display of Valentine's Day cards that nobody had bought yet, 3 weeks out. I passed the pharmacy and I heard music, coming from across the street. The empty lot across from the pharmacy, which used to be a hardware store before the new one opened outside of town. The building had been torn down 2 years earlier, and nobody had put anything new there, just a flat concrete pad where the foundation had been, and some weeds coming up through the cracks. The music was coming from there. I'm terrible with music, truly terrible. I can't play songs or identify genres with any reliability, but what I heard was like old. Not oldies radio old, but genuinely old, the kind of scratchy quality that comes from something recorded a long time ago on old equipment. It had a waltz timing 3-beat. It wasn't loud. It was just there, coming out of an empty lot on a wet Sunday night. I stopped. I looked across the street. The lot was empty as far as I could see. There were no windows on any of the adjacent buildings that would explain it, no open doors. The music continued steady, undisturbed. I told myself someone had their stereo up in one of the apartments above the bar a block down, and I was somehow hearing it reflected off the storefronts. It was a bad explanation, and part of me knew it immediately. But I kept walking. The music continued at the same volume as I walked, which is not how reflected sound works. I went 1 block, 2 blocks. The lot was behind me now, and the music was still the same volume, like it was walking with me, keeping pace. Then the music stopped mid-phrase, just cut out. And from somewhere very close, maybe 8 feet off the sidewalk to my right in the shadow of an awning, there was a sound like a needle being dragged across a record. Long and deliberate, like something winding down. I turned to look, and there was a child standing in the shadow of the awning. A small figure, 7 or 8 years old by size, standing completely still in the shadow. I could see enough to make out the clothing, a white dress or nightgown, something pale and long, and I could see the shape of a face looking in my direction, but the shadow from the awning cut off the features and I couldn't see the eyes. I said, "Are you okay?" Because what else do you say? The child's head tilted to one side. Slow. Very, very slow, rotating at the neck, until the tilt was far past where any child's head should comfortably go, and it kept going, and I understood that the tilt wasn't going to stop. I walked away. Not running, walking very fast, head down, looking at the wet sidewalk. I walked 3 blocks without looking up, and I went directly home, and I locked the door and I sat on the kitchen floor because I didn't make it to a chair. My parents were asleep. I sat on the kitchen floor and waited for morning. I called Sue the next day and tried to explain it without sounding insane. She listened carefully and she said, "Was it in front of the Mercer building?" And I described where I'd been on the street, and she was quiet for a long moment. "That's where the Mercer building was," she said. "Before the hardware store, before all of that. There was a boarding house there until the 40s, and there was a fire." She didn't say anything else about it, and I didn't ask. The white dress in the shadow. The music that walked with me. I moved away from that town in August of that year. I've been back twice for family things. I don't walk on Main Street after dark. Sue doesn't ask me why, and I appreciate that about her. Story 7. I used to run at night. 5 miles, 6 nights a week, same route, same time, the way compulsive runners do. My wife, Christina Berg, we weren't married yet, she was my girlfriend then, used to say I was running away from something. I thought that was funny at the time. I'm not laughing now. I'm Viktor Kozlov, I was 34, and the route I ran went through the financial district of the mid-sized East Coast city where I lived. Weekdays the area was jammed with people and lunches and briefcases, and the particular compressed energy of a lot of people with too much money and too many responsibilities. At 10 p.m. on a weeknight it was like a different planet. Everything locked up, towers of dark glass, the specific reverb your footsteps make in a canyon of office buildings. I loved it. The city returned to itself after business hours, I used to think. Got to be just a place again. I'd been running this route for 2 years. I had a playlist and specific split times I tracked on my watch, and a water fountain 3 miles in that had ice-cold water even in summer. And I knew where every puddle formed when it rained, which drains were broken and which weren't. I knew every security guard visible through every lobby window, the night guys who waved at me after enough months, who knew me by my shoes. This was in late September. The weather had just turned and I was running in a long-sleeve compression shirt and my usual shorts, which Christina said was wrong, but I'm always warm when I run. I remember having eaten pasta for dinner and regretting it by mile 2. I remember I'd meant to call my sister Natasha that day and hadn't, and I was building up to a guilt that would probably peak around mile 4. This is the stuff you think about when you run, nothing important, just the small maintenance of your life. I was about 2.5 miles in on a stretch through the heart of the financial district when I noticed the other runner, behind me, maybe 200 meters, moving at roughly my pace. At that hour I sometimes saw other runners, not often, but enough to not be surprising. I didn't think about it. I focused on my own stride. At the 1-mile marker that I'd painted in my mind at the corner of 2 specific streets, I glanced back. The runner was still there, same distance behind me, matching my pace so precisely that the gap between us hadn't changed. I sped up slightly. Testing myself, I told myself, interval training. I looked back at the next corner, still 200 meters, still exact. I slowed back down to my normal pace. The runner behind me slowed, same distance, same gap. I'm analytical by nature. I was a project engineer before I moved into management, and so I ran through the explanations. We were running the same route at the same pace. That was possible. The distance appearing identical could be an illusion of the long, straight blocks. I was probably just noticing a coincidence and waiting it because it was late and dark and I was alone. That's all. At the water fountain, I stopped, turned around. The runner had stopped 200 meters back, visible under a streetlight, standing still like they'd stopped to stretch or check their watch. But they weren't stretching or checking anything. They were just standing facing me, and I was suddenly aware that the runner was barefoot. I could see in the streetlight that there was nothing on the feet, just bare skin on the pavement. And the arms hanging at the sides were wrong. Too long, not grotesquely, not impossibly, but a few inches too long, hanging a few inches lower than arms should when the hands are relaxed. You'd miss it if you weren't looking for it. I was looking. I drank my water. I drank the whole thing, slowly, watching. The figure didn't move. I turned and ran. Hard, I left the financial district route and cut east, which I'd never done before, onto smaller commercial streets, thinking that the change in route would matter somehow. I had no reason to think that. I just needed to go somewhere different. I ran 6 blocks east and I was between streetlights, in one of those stretches where the bulb has gone or is cycling on and off, when something ran past me. Not behind me, past me. At a speed I couldn't process, from behind and then instantly ahead, a rush of air that pushed against my face like a door thrown open. And then there was nothing ahead of me but the empty street. Whatever had passed me was gone. I stopped. My watch said I'd been running for 42 minutes. It felt like much less. I was on a street I didn't fully recognize, 3 blocks from where I thought I was, and the city around me had the dense, silent quality of very late at night. Later than 10. I walked the rest of the way home. I didn't run for 3 weeks after that, and when I started again I changed my route and the time I went out, and I don't go through the financial district anymore. The morning after, getting ready for work, Christina saw me in the bathroom and made a sound and asked about my back. I couldn't see it myself, so I used the mirror. Down the right side of my back, from the bottom of my shoulder blade to my hip, there was a long, dark bruise, the kind you get from an impact. Long and thin, like something had struck me in passing. I hadn't felt it the night before. I didn't feel it until I saw it. It faded over 2 weeks, same as any bruise. She asked if I'd fallen. I said yes. I don't know why I said that. I've never told her the truth of that night, and I'm not sure I'm going to. Some things you keep to yourself not because you're ashamed of them, but because saying them out loud makes them more real, and there are some things you need to stay a little unreal. That's the only way to keep running. Thanks for watching. If these stories got under your skin the way they got under mine, hit that like button and subscribe. We're sharing more encounters like these every week. Let me know in the comments which story stuck with you most, and send this to a friend who thinks empty streets are nothing to worry about. Until next time, stay close to the light out there.